Welcome to Author Conversation. I'm John Hruby. The reason why I started the Author Convo series is because when I started, what I learned, I'm a professional coach, right? And I've been doing this since 2005. And what I learned was, all of us have our life, right? And some of you guys have seen this before. Our life can be pictured like, this is my life, your life, everybody's life, this house, right? And each house is a foundation, and that's our thoughts, our beliefs, and our actions, right? So our thoughts, beliefs, and actions create our life. Okay, so when I started writing more myself, and I wanted to write more, I actually hadn't started yet, I realized that my thoughts, beliefs, and actions were creating my results of not writing. And I said, well, who can I talk to, or who can I listen to that is doing what I'm doing? So I started seeing professional speakers on YouTube, and I'd go see them talk in person and at bookstores, at the Writers Guild, because I wrote 3 screenplays first before I moved over into novels, and that's where I learned story structure. Because I was like, I want to see not just what they're doing, because obviously they're writing more, right? But like, how are they thinking? And what are their belief systems about themselves, about writing, about the world, that allows them to take that creative urge and actually put it out into the world and make that happen. But I got so frustrated at times because these people sometimes, and especially on interviews and television shows or something, writers would get interviewed by people that are not writers. So they wouldn't ask the questions that I wanted to ask. Like how do you really come back every day? What does that really mean? Do you really enjoy it? How do you talk to your characters? Do your characters talk to you? How much? Do you think you're a little bit crazy, right? Because what level of all that? And so I started writing, and then when the Space Spiders on Prom Day came out, then I was like, I want to have these conversations, and I was like, all right, let's just do it, right? Because at some point we all realize, and maybe you know this or not, but supposedly, this could be something new for everyone listening. Supposedly, if you're looking for a book on something and you can't find it, either a specific topic or even a genre or something, and you're like, why can't they just do this? And why can't they, I want to find out more about this topic, or I want this type of action adventure, or whatever that is. If you say that, what that means is then you're the one that's supposed to write it. Okay. So if you go like, why don't they just make a kid's book like, or why don't they just, then that is really an invitation. The universe is inviting you through yourself to write that. Okay. So I said, all right, let's do that. So today, very excited to have Gwen with us. And Gwen, I've known for a while. And what's so amazing was she's written 7 books. Right. So I'm 14 chapters into my second one, and 7 books. At moments, it can be like, wow, that's phenomenal. She has obviously tapped into some way that allows herself to write more. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. She's super cool, super fun, super nice. And I'm hoping she doesn't prove me wrong there.
Me too.
So let's get into it. The real big question is, a lot of us are writing our first book, writing our second book. What allowed you to go, okay, I can do this, and start writing?
I think some of it was just having wanted to do it for so long and put it off for so long. And, I was in my late 30s when I finally sat down and really put any effort into it. And it was only after I quit my full-time job for other reasons, and my kids were in school during the day, and I was like, okay, I can put some time into this. And then it took me a year to figure out what I wanted to write. I mean, like, I'm not necessarily a dive right in kind of person, but so yeah, that was really it. But I mean, the urge had been there forever, and it had been kind of nudging me a lot that last year before I quit my job. Right. I mean, I'd been looking at like, could I contribute to the employee newsletter, like anything to have something to write.
Right.
So I think it just, if you ignore your creative impulses for too long, they will find a way out, I think.
Right. Right. So, but right. So I really hear creating the space, right? So you quit your job for other reasons, right? And then you had that free time during the day while the kids were gone. But still, at some point, you actually sat down and did it
Yeah.
because I wrote my first novel with two kids and a full-time job. And at some point, and maybe we'll share it later or not, but I found the space because the drive was so big.
Sure.
But so even though, so it's a lot of people are like, well, I have a full-time job, I don't have that space, I don't have that convenience, but still there's so many people with that time. We all usually have time on the weekends, right?
Mhm.
You know, there's a great saying, I don't know if you ever heard it, we all want to live forever, but we don't know how to fill a Sunday afternoon. Right? So we all do have free time. It may not be the same amount of free time, but we all have free time, and many of us have not been sitting down and being creative. So
Sure.
even though you had the time and the desire, what really do you remember? What finally got you to really sit down and go, this is
Um,
possible for me?
yeah, I think probably what it was ultimately was figuring out what it was I wanted to write. So I've been an avid reader my whole life. But it turns out the stories in my head were largely romance.
Mhm.
Um, but I love, like thrillers and mysteries and things like that too. And so then I realized there's actually this genre, which sounds silly now, but I just hadn't ever been exposed to it, of, romance and specifically romantic suspense. And once I found that and realized, aha, this is it, then all the ideas really started coming, and I kind of had to sit down and write. And I do think that eventually I would have done something, because even if I hadn't quit my job and all that, it just would have, it was definitely starting to really bother me that I wasn't doing it. That just ended up being kind of a perfect
Yeah.
storm of events. But now I work, I have the other side Scrivener business and all that kind of stuff too. So it's not like I don't have other things going on now, and I still do eventually get a book done. So
Yes, yeah, 7 of them, right? So when you are writing, do you how do you assist yourself with coming back day to day when you're writing a book?
for me, it I kind of have to make it the most important thing to do that day. Um, at least outside of other obligations that I have. So it turns out, even though this sort of appalls me a little bit, I'm very routine oriented.
Mhm.
And I basically try to do, like, set aside the first part of my day, whatever that
Yeah.
is for the most important thing for me to do that day. And so when I'm in writing mode, that's writing
Right.
or working on the book, because I'm not one of those people who can just go, okay, I want to write 70,000 words. That's 1,000 words a day. That's 70 working days. So I can have this book done in like 3 or 4 months. That is not how I work at all. I
Right,
have
right.
to, I'm not a plotter at all. And I've wasted a lot of time trying to become a plotter. So I really have to, sometimes that time is me doing research or just reading things that I think will sort of fill the well.
Right.
Sometimes it's just writing about the book, like, well, I'm not really sure how to get them from Paris to Lucerne. How can I do that? And then just suddenly my brain's like, oh, well, I have some ideas. And so it's not always just sitting down and writing. Like
Sure.
a lot of people are like, well, if you just get your butt in the chair, you're gonna, bang out a book. And that's, NaNoWriMo and some of those are great because they kind of force you to work fast and stuff. But ultimately, I can write a lot of, I've written 70,000 words in my current book, and I'm starting it over again. So it's not about word count for me.
Right, right. So let's go back and say a couple of things that you said, which I'd just like to pull out a little bit.
Sure.
So you're not a plotter.
Mm.
So what that means to me, and you tell me if this is accurate in the way you interpret that, is that you just write more in a linear way and you just write what's coming up.
Yeah, and I don't know what's coming until I get there. Kind of, it's more like living the book.
Yeah,
So,
love it. Yeah.
I'm not necessarily the character, but
Yeah. Oh, I'm my character.
every time I
Please.
get to a certain point,
Yeah.
I'm thinking,
Yeah.
okay, now what would now what would I do kind of thing. And I have, yeah, I have to be in the story in order to figure out what happens in the story. And so for me, it is more like life, where you don't know what's going to happen until you get to that spot. And then, oh, your car broke down. Shoot, now what? Yeah.
Now, yes, and just for everyone else who may or may not know, Stephen King wrote a book called On Writing, and supposedly he doesn't like to plot at all and outline. He's supposedly in the book, if it's a true story. Yeah, he said he outlined like two books or maybe three, and he said they were the worst experiences ever of his life, and that he writes and surprises himself. And Neil Donald Walsh says the same thing, but he's nonfiction, but he's like, I love to surprise myself, right? And so, and I might certainly write, and there's a saying, if the writer's not laughing, the reader's not laughing. If the writer's not crying, the reader's not crying, right? And it's awesome, right? When I wrote Space Spiders on prom day, there were a couple times that I like literally laughed and fell out of the chair. But how could I surprise myself with my own joke? Do you know what I'm saying? It's interesting. It's an interesting thing. So if you're like living the book, you're just going with it. But do you, I know you don't plot, you don't really outline, but do you have like, or maybe not at all, like at least a general idea where you're going at the very end? Or nothing at all? Or do you literally like, this is wide open, who knows?
Yeah, I know it from a structure standpoint, right?
Okay,
So I know like what kinds of scenes need to come up.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily know what they're going to be. And, obviously I know like, okay, we have to have a showdown with this guy or that person.
Yes.
Those kinds of things. But I basically start with like character and maybe a premise, and I try to write that, and then it usually doesn't work. And so I'm sort of, I don't want to say stuck, but like, I have a series. So I have at least one character that I have to work with for this book.
Right.
So then it's just trying to figure out how to get them into a situation with another character that's going to create enough conflict, both internal and external conflict, that will sustain an entire novel.
Right.
And that's really where all of my little false starts come in. It's like each one is me sort of learning what doesn't work, like that whole whatever Thomas Edison science method.
Yeah.
And then eventually I will hit on something that sort of feels like it has the right mood for what I write. And because I've tried to write some stories, I'm like, well, I enjoy this, but it feels like a rom-com or something. That's not what I'm writing, or whatever. So there's a lot of elements that I'm trying to hit, and then to feel like I'm interested enough in this book and I can figure out what happens next. And I do think it's enough of a, conflict to keep the reader going. So it's a little bit of trial and error. And I have kind of what I call like a revisionist brain. So it works better when it has something to revise. So if I put something out there one day, then the next day I'll be like, well, that doesn't work. But if I do this, then that, it could take off or something like that. So I really have to put something out there and then let my brain sort of stew on it for a day or two before I really know what happens.
Right. And then at what point does it kick in?
And
you decide
usually probably after, like, if I hit the first turning point, that's a really good sign if I can get that far. So, like the part where they go through to the door of no return kind of thing. They're definitely hooked together. So if I can get to that point, I'm usually pretty good. Somewhere around the midpoint, I will probably be like, oh no, I should have done this, and like do some more revising. And then I'm usually like, if I can get to get through the middle, the end will usually come a lot faster than the beginning did. So it's a little bit painful, but it's also fun. I just have to like relax and not worry about how fast it happens.
Right.
Which is hard.
I appreciate you saying that. Relax and not worry about how fast it happens. And what I also hear is that, what I really, I'm a super big fan of structure, in the sense that I just know it really well. I mean, I know it because I studied screenwriting for like literally 15 years. So like, what's a beginning, what's a middle, what's an end? How do you do this and how arc it up? But what I really liked you saying was, you know, structure wise, but you don't know exactly what the scene's going to be or how that, you know, there's going to be a showdown. Like when I was doing Space Spiders on prom day, I knew there was going to be the big showdown at the end with the boss spider, right? You know, you just, also, if you play any video game, you know that's going to happen. But exactly how we were going to get there or what crazy stuff was going to happen during the fight, you know, and that I totally didn't know. So let me ask you something about trust,
Okay.
which I'm assuming you have developed to, I mean, because you've done this for 7 books now. But I'm going to say words. You tell me if it's totally different or how, what resonates or what doesn't. It's totally cool if none of this makes sense, or, you know, you see it from a different point of view. And that's why I want to have this conversation, because I want to better understand, like, what level of, like, it sounds like you're enjoying and trusting the process, at least to the degree in which you continually return and are productive and make something happen.
Yeah, I'm getting back to that. So there was kind of a period in the middle of the books where I was trying so hard to write faster. I mean, like in outside of romance, there's not so much of this push, maybe, but in the romance industry, there are people writing 10 to 15 books a year sometimes, but it's really common for them to write 3 to 4 books a year. And I've never, ever been able to do that.
Okay.
And, but I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how can I do that too? And just, yeah. So just always trying to, and I'm kind of an efficiency oriented person. Like all my previous jobs were like process improvement and, you know, like whatever. So,
So,
it,
so were you getting hard on yourself for not being fast enough, or you were just trying to figure out how
yeah.
to do it? Okay.
And also frustrated with having to start the book over 5 times. Like none of my friends seem to have to do that. Right. So it was, you start to wonder like, what's wrong with you? You know, you go to conference, it's all about plotting, but
Yeah.
of course that's because nobody can teach pantsing. Right.
Yeah.
But
What did you say? Pantsing? Like taking
pantsing,
someone's pants off?
writing by the seat of your pants.
Okay. Gotcha. I was going to say, because in your romance novel, there is a lot of pantsing. I mean, there's a lot of people losing.
De-pantsing, maybe.
De-pantsing, right. Right.
Just a little.
Just a little.
Yeah. So, you know, because sometimes like the more you learn, the harder it gets, because now you've got all these things in your head of like, oh, I have to worry about structure. I have to worry about which words I should and shouldn't use. Like, oh, you can't kill the dog because nobody will read your book again. Like all these rules, and not that they're all bad, but
Yeah.
just not the things I want to be thinking about when I'm in the creative process. Those are better for the editing process.
Right.
And
Yes.
I could feel myself starting to self-censor before I even like got the idea to my conscious part of my brain. And so it did just lose some of the fun there in the
Sure.
middle. Like it was much more of a, I got to push to get this done. And what's wrong with me because it takes me so long, and what's wrong with me because I have to keep starting over. And
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just different from a lot of my friends and the people I know. And, you know, I've taken some classes that have helped with that and stuff, but some of it's just like going back and looking at how did I work in the beginning? Like I used to take a nap every day, like just lay down on the bed for a while, whatever, didn't always sleep. And I would get all these ideas.
Yeah.
And then you get to this point where like, well, that's not very efficient, taking a nap when you should be writing.
Yeah.
But it turns out it is, because
Yeah.
that's where all my ideas come in. You know, so stuff like that, like having to relearn how I work and kind of just block out the noise of how all these other people do it, because it may not be how, like, see what resonates with you and maybe try some things. Some people, it turns out they really are plotters and then they just take off. But yeah, but also you have to learn to trust yourself and your process and your own instincts when it comes to writing. Otherwise, I think you'll suck all the joy out of it.
Right. Hey, so on that note, the Bruce Joel Rubin, yeah, and we'll open it up for questions in a bit. Bruce Joel Rubin is a screenwriter who did Jacob's Ladder and Ghost, the movie. And I've seen him speak a few times. And he actually said the way he writes is he sits in his recliner chair with his laptop, types. And then when he gets done with the idea, he leans back and just like rests, meditates until the next idea comes. Then he sits up, type, and he leans back. And so I just wanted to share that like with everyone. I love the whole nap thing and the whole relaxed and the enjoyment. And I've worked with myself and other writers numerous times. Yeah, once judgment enters the scene and shoulds, that's a great way to slow down creativity or stop it and then make it not fun. So, and when you say when you're returning to it, is that like after, like, was this book more the returning to your process and enjoying, or after this book, now you're like, okay, before I do the next one, I am really going back to who I am and how I do this?
I would say the last couple of books have been me trying really hard to return
Gotcha.
to that, and it's just been sort of a long, slow process of unlearning or relearning or whatever, and trying to figure it out and be honest with myself and like get over my husband's been home, right, because of COVID for the last year. He's been working from home, so I'm much more self-conscious about like the fact that I'm supposed to be working, but I'm staring at a wall, or I'm watching a TV show or whatever, and I'm like, I am working, but it,
right, it can be really misconstrued, especially if someone else is like busting their butt doing stuff or whatever. And it's
right, it's much easier to look busy if I'm creating a class. So, I can be like, oh, I finished a lesson today, and that feels very satisfying and very productive. And writing, I've had to switch how I measure my writing. So I do keep track of my words, and that does, sometimes help give me like a little, I can, if I just do a little longer, I could definitely reach 1,000 or something. But I've been focusing more on hours. So when I sit down in front of the computer, it's like, can I get 3 hours in today, for example? And then if I did 3 hours of somehow actively working on my story, then I can feel satisfied. And it's not so much about the word count. And the word count, like I said, it's meaningless. I have 70,000 words, and I'm not, I will use some of it, but
and I totally hear you. There's this a shift from end goals, and it's not the exact same thing, but end goals is sort of like, is the book finished, and process goals is, did I put in the 2 hours or 3 hours today, or did I do so many hours, and I totally hear you about the research. There was one point in Space Spiders on prom day I got to where all of the hunting groups showed up, and they were going to have different weapons to fight the space spiders, right? So I had an awesome 2 weeks of research with my 13-year-old about rocket launchers and different, and it was great because I learned, and then I wanted to return back to, you said, filling the well, and that's what I think is the power of research. Is my brain needs stuff to work with to be creative, and it's my job as the writer to go, okay, I don't know that much about whatever missile launchers or France or Pacino, whatever, country music, and they're walking to a country bar, so I need to do a little bit of research, and then all of a sudden the ideas can come.
And that's actually the fun part. Like, I have to remind myself, I love the research. I'm a learner-oriented individual, learning-oriented. And so that's one of the reasons I like writing so much, is it's always a challenge, and I get to learn new things all the time. And I get to choose what those things are. So, based on the story I create. So the last one was like set in Montana, and, I'd been there, but I had to do a lot of research on various parts of Montana and the animals and the weather and the whatever, money laundering and
Oh, you should have come to me. I would have. How do you know when you've got enough research to start?
I guess if I feel like I know what to say. So it's interesting. Like, if I have a premise, like my third I mean, I have actually more manuscripts than 7, but
Oh, do you? Okay.
just the 6 published novels in the Scribner books are
Okay.
published.
So,
But
so you mean they're finished, but you haven't published
they will
them yet?
never, nobody will ever
Oh,
see them. Those are
okay.
my early training novels, if you will.
Gotcha.
But yeah, my third one, I usually write Air Force heroes, at least for this series. But for whatever reason, this guy's a Marine sniper. And so I was like, well, damn it. I haven't done any research on Marine snipers or the Marines or any of that.
Right.
Right. You know, my husband is in the Air Force or was in the Air Force, and my dad was in the Navy and the Army. So I like all the services except the Marines I knew something about.
Right.
But that was fun. I went and did, you know, all this reading. So that's when I was like, okay, I'm getting ready to write this guy. I need to go learn more about it, so I even can form a better picture of him and make sure it's accurate. And then there were some things in his past, and I needed to go research those. And then he was from Montana, so I needed to do a little work on that. Like just, you know, all those.
So you just know when you need to know something, and then you do it. And then at some point you're like, okay, ideas, words, dialogue, whatever next ideas are coming forward, you're like, okay, I got enough. And of course, if you need more, you go back.
Right. I just do it until I feel like I have enough. And
Right.
then if I get stuck along the way, I mean, I try not to do, if it's something little like, you know, look up the whatever gas mileage of this model of car or something, I'll just make a note for that and come back to it later. Usually I'm trying to get better at doing that. So it doesn't disrupt my momentum. But if it's something big, like I don't know which way to turn the story because I'm not sure how they're going to get from A to B.
Right.
And I did this whole thing, research on trains in Europe, so I could figure out like, could they get on a train without ID and with only with cash, or, you know, all these kind of things.
Right.
So, you know, that's when I'll be like, okay, I don't know how to proceed forward without going and figuring out more. Then it's legitimate research and not just, you know, procrastination.
What do you think would be helpful for us to discuss in service to other people embracing their creativity more that I haven't asked about yet today? Is there something that comes to mind, or?
I mean, I guess some of it would just be like, everybody's different. So I think people need to just try to figure out what works for them and cut out the noise. But as far as like, I mean, I do have, sure, I can throw out all sorts of things like making lists of questions and improv. Things
Take
that
improv?
I actually did do an improv class online because I was signed up for one and then COVID hit. But I took a workshop from a lady who in LA who does some. She's an actress who does some like little parts here. And I've seen her in a bunch of movies this year, or TV shows. It's been kind of fun. But she did a workshop on improv for writers, and so she like taught us like all the improv sort of tools or little what do they call them, games that they play, but like how you could sort of use that to spur your writing.
Was that useful?
Well, it's funny because I don't do it that often, but actually like this book, which is my most recent novel, the beginning of that book, the lady literally gets knocked off the side of a mountain and she's hanging off the cliff and the guy pulls her up, right?
I just recently read that. It's excellent. Yeah.
So I got that from doing an ABC exercise where every sentence had to start with the next letter of the alphabet.
Right.
And I was just starting my mornings with those, trying to see if that would help trigger anything. And I kind of had an idea where they were, but like it just came to me like in my little ABC story, she's hanging off the side of a mountain and this redheaded guy, whatever, helps pull her up. And I tweaked it, but honestly, that was like the core of that scene. Neat. So it's kind of funny. You just never know.
Right.
I even find like I will go read a craft book, and I still sometimes do it out of insecurity. Like, well, maybe I'm just not writing faster because I need to learn more craft, which is probably not true at this point. Not that you can't learn more, but I mean, I don't think that's the key problem. But the craft books often trigger things, you know, like it'll ask a question and I'll be like, oh, and then I'll just run off and have a bunch of ideas and never go back to that craft book even. But like I was halfway through chapter 1 and I got a bunch of ideas because, you know, so you got to like learn what works for you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I've I even think almost that my experience is like I can almost pick up any book and almost watch any TV show. And if I'm in a place of allowance, I can watch 15 minutes of some random movie in the middle, and all of a sudden something that can trigger me like, oh, this. So there's
Yeah.
like, it's that old, I come from like new age spiritual background of, if you have a question, just go to the bookshelf and close your eyes and pick a book, and whatever you read is going to have some message for you, because it's me that's pulling the book and all that. And I'm beginning to find that can assist me in my writing, and if I'm open to it, if I'm like, okay, that's a possibility. I want to say super fun.
Thanks.
Really super fun. And the one thing I wanted, and I didn't do this the last other times when I've talked to authors, but I'm going to read this paragraph
Okay.
because my friend Nipper says reading a novel is like going on a mini vacation every day, which I think is beautiful. And then I often say, do you want to go on an action adventure romance, vacation? Can we use a little bit? And yours would be a suspenseful romance thriller, vacation. And because you just choose a few words that I've never chosen to write, which I just totally enjoyed reading. So I want to, so right, this is her. She's off she bumped into this guy, fell off the cliff, Lindsay. She finally opened her eyes. Her rescuer had removed his pack and sunglasses and sat on the ground next to her, breathing hard. So, okay, so he just pulled her up. He wiped the sweat from his face with the hem of his t-shirt, revealing chiseled abs, before he scanned her from head to toe with brilliant blue eyes. Dirt streaked his cheeks and dusted his auburn whiskers, but did nothing to hide how handsome he was. That's so much fun. That is so great. I so look forward to seeing if Lindsay and Todd make it. I'm serious. I look forward to reading the rest. And is that the joy you feel when you're writing, or what would you say your overall, I mean, sometimes it's hard and whatever, but what's your overall feeling of coming back and doing this and doing what you do?
Oh, I mean, I love writing when when it's working. I love it. When the words are flowing or the story's coming, that's the best feeling in the world. So, yeah. And I love getting involved with the characters and figuring out what their story is going to be, and sort of making them work for their happy ending, and just setting up. Yeah, I don't know. It's fun. I've always enjoyed sort of an adventurous story. I think I don't know how it would hold up now, but like Swiss Family Robinson was one of my favorites as a kid. And I love, I love all the Bourne book. I read the Bourne books before they were movies, and, just Tom Clancy and like all those guys when I was younger. So, I don't tend to write like political thrillers per se, but I definitely want that like sense of adventure and sort of being completely pulled out of your normal world.
Yeah. All right, let me ask you a couple questions about specifics, meaning, so how do you set yourself up when you're writing a book so that when you have time, you can come back and actually start? Like, I call it setting yourself up for success, right? How do you make it easy for yourself to re-engage the next day? Is there anything you do? And also, is there anything you do when you finish for a day that then also sets you up for the next time you come back?
Sure. So generally I will reread like part of what I wrote yesterday, or like the last scene, just to kind of get me back into where I am and the mood of the writing.
Yep.
When I finish writing for the day, if I have any thoughts about what should come next, but I'm not ready to write them, or it's just time to quit, whatever, I will leave a couple notes of like, they could go here.
Or on paper? Just
I work in Scrivener. And so I just leave little notes either at the bottom of the scene, or like if I'm ready to start a new scene, the next day I will just put some notes in the sidebar about what should happen.
Gotcha.
Or, it could even be like, I have an idea for the opening conversation. I might write like a few snippets or something, but yeah, so I don't do like heavy stuff, but
Yeah. That's awesome. So then obviously the next day when you come back, or later that night, if you're going to write twice in a day, then you read either the last couple paragraphs or the last page, or you read the notes and then you just start on. So
Yeah, I tend to read sometimes I just read what I wrote yesterday, because it's never more than 2,000 words usually.
Right.
And I will do little revisions and stuff. And then that will kind of get me into,
Right. Get you
yeah.
in movement. Fantastic. Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. How do you find readers? But I also, what questions do you ask them that allows you to get information that's useful if you're going to consider what they're saying, if you're going to rewrite?
Do you mean like beta reader types?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry, that's what I mean.
I was like, that's the magic question, isn't it? Yeah. Let's see. So I have two good writer friends who are my first critique partners. And I never give them the book till I'm like as done with it as I can be without help.
Gotcha.
And then they will give me their feedback. And one writes romantic suspense with a very similar kind of worldview to me. Another one writes contemporary romance. So she's got like kind of a whole different viewpoint, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And then as far as beta readers,
well, what questions do they ask, or what kind of feedback do you want from them? I mean, because here's my take real quick. If someone just says, hey, that's really good, I like it, that's wonderful, I love it, but it's not really helpful, right? I can't do anything with that. So what do you want from them to assist you?
Okay. I want to know every time they were pulled out of the story and why. And I want them to be fairly brutally honest about it, because otherwise it doesn't help me. So these are people that they know I will be honest with them, and they will be honest with me. And I'm always telling them, like, if you didn't see a mark for me, I loved it. And I try to remember putting smiley faces every once in a while, so they won't think everything is just negative. But really it's like, sure, tell me if something's working. That's great to know too. But really, I want to know where does something break down? Like, what made you go, huh? Or did I like have a plot hole? Or I'm less worried about specific words unless they're problematic words for some reason.
Right.
For whatever.
Yeah.
But mostly it's just what pulls them out of the story, and then
you can say hey. And just for everyone listening, and maybe even for myself, but definitely. And when they tell you, hey, this slowed me down, or this pulled me out of it, or I wasn't sure exactly, were they on the side of the mountain? I thought they were back at the house. Or so you take that really personally and you say to yourself, oh my gosh, I'm never going to write again. Is that how you deal with any sort of feedback?
Absolutely. I just go hide in a hole somewhere. It's what I asked for. Sometimes it can be a little hard. It helps because these are people that I know care about me. And so I take it that way. If it's just like, a review on Amazon, obviously that can be different. But yeah, I have learned over time to get better at taking the feedback and to look at it as a gift. And, even if sometimes I'm like, what are they talking about? But then, the brain starts spinning, and like the next day I'm like, but actually, it could be even better if, and so I, after having done that enough times, I trust the process. I trust them. And I also, like, sometimes I totally disagree. Or if they both say like, this would be better if you did, like, one friend usually wants me to put in more emotion, and the other one likes it the way it is, or is even like a little less emotion, and I'm like, okay, well, I like being somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Or whatever. So I may just ignore both of them.
Yes. Right. Because they're not saying, what? I thought they were in a car, not a helicopter. Right. That's
if it's a story problem, or some kind of plot hole or something, like, what about this guy who was on his way there and you forgot about him? I'm like, oh shoot.
But here, let me say out loud, which I think is so great that you have two. I always tell people, and I know for myself, I do it slightly different. I actually like, because I come from a screenwriting thing, the first 15 minutes of a movie is so important. It's the good guy, the bad guy, the inner theme, the outer, the challenge, what it's all about, right? And this all happens within 15 pages of a movie, 15 minutes, 15 pages. So for me, I usually like to have people read the first 100 pages that I read of a book. Do you like it? Am I on? Do you feel it? And I always tell people, you always want at least, it's great that you got two people you care about, that's and you know are solid and good writers, and also they care for you. That's fantastic. But if people don't, I always say you want to get at least 3 or 4, because probably one of them is going to be too busy and never going to get back to you, right? And the last thing you want to do is ask one person and then they suddenly say yes when you wait 2 months, and then they can't do it because whatever life situation came up. But so you ask 4 people, one's probably not going to come through, and then the other 3 is really important, because if one person says this and another person says the complete opposite or doesn't say it, that's good information. And then also if 2 or 3 say the same thing, well, then by all means, I want to listen, right?
Sure.
Like, yeah. So, but that's why it's really important never just to ask one, right? Because if I ask one person and then they say they like something or they don't like it, then I'm like, oh, that's the God's truth, that's, and maybe it is and maybe it's not.
Right. That's just one person's opinion. And,
Right.
it's like getting a bad review from somewhere. That's just one person who didn't resonate for some reason.
Right.
I think
they're wrong and they're,
early on I had maybe more critique partners, and I definitely would do stuff when I was trying to get traditionally published, because my novels are self-published. When I originally thought I wanted to get traditionally published, I was doing all the like contests and critique groups and getting your first 50 pages read and all that kind of stuff and submitting to agents and editors. And so I was getting a lot more feedback on the early parts of the book.
right.
But I found that with later works, once I got more comfortable just as a writer,
Yeah.
and I had learned a lot of the stuff I'd learned from the first few books, I didn't like getting feedback too early because it would kill my creativity. If somebody didn't like something, I'd just be like, fine. And I guess I start a new book, you know what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
And some people absolutely want that for every single chapter through the whole way. Like, again, trusting yourself and maybe trying some different things and seeing what works for you. And then if something, like, just don't let people kill your momentum or your creativity. So if you like, because there's some pretty harsh critique partners out there, and they may not know what they're talking about.
They may not be. And I tell people what I've found really valuable is, one is frustrated writers who are not writing. You got to be really careful of that, because they're like, well, I would do this. Well, yeah, but that's not what I'm doing, right? And they were just and it's awesome that you have writers that are able to sense your story. I mean, I have a couple writer friends too that are really good, and they know what I'm up to, and they can give me feedback about my story and not project everything that they would do if it was their story.
Exactly.
And I don't think a lot of people, like, I had a woman I was working with, and we knew this mutual guy, and he's a writer, and I'm like, I think you want to get a feedback from a reader, not a writer, because a reader will tell you, did they like it, did they not like it, when did it slow them down, when did they got confused? And she's like, oh, no, he's really great, and he's a great guy. And I'm like, all right, fine. So she comes back and goes, yeah, you're right. Jason just said, I just change it from first person to third person, and you should do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this. And she's like, that's not my story at all. And he was not able to separate himself. So that's just a little heads up for people that may be looking for their first critiques. Look for people who are readers, perhaps, instead of writers, so they're able to just tell you, did they enjoy it, or what slowed them down, and all that.
And definitely in your genre too, I think, because
Yes.
I mean, sure, it can be helpful to have somebody read things that doesn't normally read your genre, but there's so many conventions in every genre that you have to hit, right? Like, if you write a romance and the couple doesn't end up together at the end, that's not a romance.
Right.
even if it's a love story.
Oh, you ruined it for me, but I'm also excited to see how it happens.
Okay, but would you be surprised? Like, it's a mystery. They better solve the mystery, right? That's
Yes,
not ruining
right.
the book.
No, it's
So
not.
that's
Not
the
at all.
promise of the genre.
It's the promise, and it's also how is it going to happen? That's really
Sure. I mean, if I can make you doubt that it will happen,
Right.
then I'm doing my job, right?
Right.
Hopefully the
Right.
whole time you're like, I know they're going to end up together, but how?
How exactly? I don't see it. Yeah. I can just tell you, I care about Lindsay and Todd, and I really look forward to reading more. I really do.
Okay.
And I didn't expect that. I mean, I didn't even know what I expected. I don't, well, oh, I was going to say about the Stephen King and the genre thing. You're exactly right. I've only read like one Stephen King novel, and it's the one he goes back in time and tries to say John F. Kennedy. So I'm not like a horror guy. So if somebody put their name to a Stephen King novel and had me read it, I would just be like, that's too scary or too gross or whatever. You know what I mean? But that doesn't mean hundreds of thousands of millions of people, love his work. So you're exactly right. It's really important to get someone that enjoys that type of genre. So now when you want to take some time to stare at a wall and just think, do you just go into a different room than your husband so he doesn't know? Or do you go for a walk? Or how do you do that now?
Yeah, well, luckily, so he took my old office downstairs. So we're on separate floors most of the time. It's just like if he comes up to get food or something and I'm I'm on the bed. But yeah, I mean, I've also been trying to be really vocal about letting him know, like, this is part of my process. And it turns out, and so said it's really necessary. So trust her too.
He doesn't give you a hard time, does he? Or
no, he doesn't. It's all me. It's all my own, like, sort of insecurities and self-consciousness. And, having originally been in the business world and then coming here not coming here, but, becoming a writer and just, how the world thinks, right? Like, I'm not an early riser, but if you don't get up at, 7 o'clock or 5 a.m. and write or whatever, then you're doing it wrong. And so it's just, again, it all goes back to like what works for you versus what everyone else is telling you to do. Yeah, I do. If I need to stare at the wall, I will. I'm just trying to be less self-conscious about it now.
Right. So Kim asks, so you find that using Scrivener in the drafting stage is useful even if you're not a plotter?
Oh, yes, actually. And I get that a lot because I teach Scrivener classes. So
yeah, real quick.
I wrote this book too.
Yeah. Real quick, I read that book. And I when I self-published Space Spiders on prom day, it is amazing. It's super easy to, excuse me, to get something up on the internet, a book. You can literally get your book on the internet in like 3 minutes. But to get your book on the internet and have it look good, it took me like 8 months of reading Scrivener and learning it and tweaking things and doing things. So, and at the last phase of it, I was like, I'm going to pay someone for a couple hours because I cannot figure out these last 7 things. It was incredibly watching videos on YouTube, so Gwen, that's how I first met Gwen a while back. So if anyone is moving in that direction and needs support in the Scrivener world, then you know that. So go ahead and answer the question.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of people think Scrivener is for plotters, and it is, honestly, I think it does work for them, absolutely, but it is amazing as a non-plotter, pantser. To have something that helps me keep everything organized because I don't already have it all laid out in advance. So, I can see my story as it builds because you can write in chunks like scenes or chapters. That also gives me a sense of where I am in my structure. Excuse me. And I can keep all my notes and research and everything and pictures all in one place. So it just kind of flexes to fit whatever your need is. Like somebody who's a plotter will maybe create index cards and or documents for all the scenes that they're going to have. Whereas somebody like me who's a pantser will create a document, write a scene, and then create a new document, write the next scene, and I'll put little notes about what's supposed to happen and stuff, but yeah, so it
I'm
just
I'm
helps.
I'm with you. I use Scrivener too now, and I'm a pantser too. I mean, I know structure enough that so I just start writing, and usually it's not just whole chapters. Each document is sort of like a part of it, and then I can just sort of feel when that was a chapter or whatever. And then sometimes I create a folder for a chapter, and then there's a little back and forth. And it's great to see it. For me, it's great to see it all come together in the side, and then I can sort of start feeling, um, where am I in the story structure. But I certainly don't use the index cards or anything like that, or at least I
Yeah,
haven't yet.
you don't, and I really don't either because I just have never worked like that. But
Yeah.
just being able to like, if I want to go back to a scene,
Yep.
I can just look on my little list on the side and just jump right to it. Whereas I was very frustrated in Word where it was like one long continuous document for 70,000 words
Yeah.
and then having us go up and down and up and down to review things. And so, yeah, you can like split your screen and look at two things
Right.
at once. Like there's so much that's very helpful.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the second book I'm doing, Space Sand Sharks on Spring Break, there's the sharks are hopscotching their way to Florida for spring break. So they show up on different islands and different beaches and kill people, as well as Chevy and Sweetie and everybody comes down to Florida. So it's fun to see the breakdown, and I can see, like, I want every 3 chapters or so is a shark chapter. Do you know what I mean? So building the tension as well as building the character story, and then they're all going to collide together at a certain point. And it's very easy with Scrivener to click on that and look at that, or add something or move something, rather than
Yeah.
a long Word document. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it really helps me just stay organized and like I can color code stuff and all, I love that. So,
All right, another question for you.
okay.
Kwan's saying, how do you know what type of story you want to tell if you've never written a story? Is reading more stories to find out helps that click?
Yeah, that's a good question. So some of it I think is I would expect that what you're drawn to is probably a good start, at least. How does it feel to try to write something? You could even try to write a short story or whatever in that genre, play around with some ideas. But then it's interesting because like I said, I read a lot of thrillers and mysteries. And I didn't realize it till I found the romance genre that I was irritated that like David Baldacci would set up these really interesting characters um, that maybe had a romantic interest, but it would take him like 8 books for them to even realize it. And then, or whatever,
Right.
and I didn't understand how annoyed I was getting until I started reading these other things. So, but I read like a lot of historical romance. I have no interest in writing historical romance at all.
Yeah.
Like Bridgerton type stuff. So some of it is just playing around a little bit with what you're comfortable with. Like I started out just writing more contemporary romance, and I wanted to have a suspense element in there, but I didn't have the confidence to do it yet. So some of it was just getting better at writing in general, until I felt like I could write what I really wanted to write. So I think for now, like if you have an idea, just try to follow it. And maybe don't worry so much about structure and all that kind of stuff if you're following an idea, because some of that will come naturally to you. Like I learned story structure, so now I'm doing it a little more deliberately. But when I went back and looked at the manuscripts I'd written before I really got a handle on it, it was there. It was maybe a little loose, a little messy, but it was all there because we read and we watch movies and we watch TV shows, and they all follow, at least in Western stories, they follow a very specific arc that is almost always there, at least in the genre type stuff. Literary fiction is a whole different animal, but
I agree with you 100%. And I mean, Stephen King says, if you want to write, just read. And there's a lot of writers that I work with, like some of them that just grew up, kind of had horrendous childhoods, but they just read a lot. I mean, like 3, 4, 5 books a week. That's how they survive. So they've just totally absorbed it. So when they go to write, they hit all the points. They don't even know it because they've just absorbed it and they know it. And other people I work with, sometimes they often hit whatever, 7 out of the 12 or whatever you want to say. And then likewise me, I come from the total opposite of I learned it. So now I can use it more because I didn't read that much. I mean, I read when I was growing up, but I watched a lot of action adventure TV. And so yeah, so if structure helps, fantastic, but I don't think you need it, definitely not to start.
Right. Well, and who wrote Story Trump Structure? James, John, somebody. Anyway, he talks about how ultimately it's the story that really draws people in. The structure stuff is, everybody knows you need some kind of disappointment before the final showdown or whatever. Like if you were watching a movie and it didn't happen,
it was all too easy.
It just kind of falls flat, right? So, I mean, I've read books where it wasn't really in there, and you spend the whole time like sort of anticipating in a both like nervous and delicious way when it's all going to fall apart, right? And then they're going to have to come back from that. And when it doesn't fall apart, then you're disappointed.
Right, because so Kim, first off, Kim just goes, thanks a lot for the notes about the conversation about Scrivener. I've been using it, but trying to force myself the way plotters do now, I can be less rigid. I think that's what I'm going to take away from this whole conversation, really, is that one of the big things that we're really talking about is do it your way, whatever that is, and don't do it. I mean, obviously, right. Learn from other people, be aware of it.
Yeah. Experiment, because you don't know. I mean, I have friends who started out sort of pantsing their way through, and they learned a plotting technique, and it's just like changed their lives,
Right.
So definitely try stuff, but also don't bang your head against a wall for a year when it doesn't work for you. Like, what's wrong with me? Nothing is wrong with you. But,
right. And and someone
I can stand here now and tell you that.
Right. Right. And likewise, I've helped writers by teaching them story structure, and then that really goes, oh, sometimes people get lost in the middle of a story of like what happens, and structure is like, like a car, right? When you go buy a car, you'd never go out into a lot and go, what? It's got 4 wheels, it's got doors. How ordinary, how regular. It's like, no, that's the structure of the car, right? You got wheels, you got an engine, you got doors, you got windows. You need those because if you don't have a window, you can't see the other cars, right? But then you can do whatever you want with your creativity, right? You can do a convertible, you can do SUV, you can do electric car, blah, blah, blah. So structure is, in my opinion, right, not limiting, but it helps people know, oh, I need a door to get into a house, right? You can have a round hobbit door in the side of a mountain, or you can have a double door with columns and blah, 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 but you need a door.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about like a different kind of blank page, like if somebody handed you a piece of paper and said, draw something, you would just be thinking, all the things I could draw, what should I draw? But if they said, draw a tree, then you can get started, right? Everybody's tree is going to look different, but you're like, oh, okay, now I can start because I know I'm drawing a tree and this is what a tree looks like to me.
Right.
And I like that sort of idea of like, it just pulls you in a little bit. So you're not, right. It's hard enough to figure out where the story should go, even when I know the genre and the subgenre and which, who my hero is and like all that stuff. I still have so many possibilities that it can be a little bit paralyzing. And that's probably another one of my issues is like, I keep trying to find the possibility that I like the most, but at some point I probably just need to pick one and go with it. Right. So,
which you've obviously done over and over again. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. like somebody's like, we're still working on their first book and you've written, it's like, listen, woman, you've written 7. So you've figured something out. When I wrote, and we can end on this, you okay with, we go a couple more minutes? I mean,
sure.
You okay? Yeah, you're good. Okay. Super. Quan just says that's super helpful when you're talking about ask myself question, what story I want to write. Fantastic. When I started writing, I've been writing on and off, whatever, since I was a teen, right? But when I really started writing Space Spiders on Prom Day on a regular basis, And then we're even talking like daily, half hour, 45 minutes, an hour a day. What I found, which totally surprised me, was I became a better husband. I became a better father. I became better at my day job because I had a day job then. And what I realized, I even started walking the dog more often. And I kid you not. And what I realized was, now that I was like tapping into this joy, spirit of adventure, creativity, for myself, and doing what I felt called to do, I literally had more positive energy that I didn't have to try and become a better husband. I didn't have to try and become a better father. I just literally was, because I had more to give. And it was at that point that I really moved into coaching, because I was just like, oh my gosh, this is another key to living well that people literally don't know, right? Like if they can write a poem, garden, cook, write, play guitar, whatever their creativity is, they literally will have a better life. And I've told my kids that I'm not going to make a better solar panel, right? I'm not going to make a car that runs on blue-green algae, right? That's not me. But if I can help people be more creative in whatever, I literally honestly believe the planet will be a better place in like 4.3 days is my estimate. If everyone did 20 to 30 minutes of drumming, writing, poetry, whatever that was, painting. So I guess that's the question I have for you. Do you find you're like a better person? Do you enjoy life more when you're writing? What have you found?
Yeah. Yeah, and I just read a whole book on that. I'll have to like send you the link because I can't remember who it is right now, where it was all about like you will live your best life if you find your creative outlet. And I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, because I think when you are doing something, whether it's your full-time job or it's just a hobby, um, as long as you're giving yourself that creative outlet, I think you'll be happier in general. Whereas if you're denying yourself that, um, there's this little thing in your brain that you're choosing to ignore, and it grates at you, I think. And you are unhappy because you're not following the things you want to do. So, even if it was just a few minutes a day so that you got it out there, I think you would feel a lot better.
Right. Right. And how long of a pause between books, if I may ask? Well,
Uh,
and you actually do feel better when you re-engage? I mean, I know there's always a celebration phase and like, I'm never going to do that again phase, or maybe I won't ever do that again. But then when you get back into it, how's that?
So it usually takes me a couple months, partly because I'm going through the publishing process and the launch process. And then usually that's if I have a class in mind, I will spend a couple months creating another class. Like that's what I just got done doing.
Mhm.
And then, yeah. So I during that time though, I'm also sort of pondering. I'm like doing research reading and I'm, trying to sort of, like we talked about earlier, fill the well again
Yeah.
with the next book in mind. So I might have some idea of what I want it to be, or at least, gosh, I don't even know like where the ideas necessarily come from, but it's just all the things that I take in will pop out sparks here and there. And I keep track of those so that when I'm going to write the next book, I'll be like, oh yeah, I really love that idea where she was this and he was that or whatever. So yeah, it generally for me is a few months before I am ready to sit down and actually start another book again. And some people can just dive right in. And I have a coach friend who talks about like the fallow period. Some people really need that fallow period to kind of re-energize and collect
Mhm.
enough material again to start up. And some people don't.
What steps did you take to self-publish and get noticed?
Okay. so I'm a super deliberative person. So I spent a year figuring out how self-publishing works.
Right.
And, I used to go to a conference annually, a writing conference. And so I would take all the tracks on self-publishing. I have a lot of friends who've done it. This was back in 2014 is when I self-published the first book. So it's been a while. So as far as steps go, I mean, it's gotten easier, but and actually, yeah, I would just, either talk to people who've done it, or maybe attend a conference on it or read a book on it. There's definitely materials out there now. And for me, it's just, I finish the book, I format the book, I put the book on the retailer, and I have a newsletter.
Yeah.
So I let all my newsletter followers know. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a big thing, but like now it's not a big thing because I've been doing it for a while. So I guess it's, if you've never gotten strong feedback before, I would definitely hire an editor.
Yeah.
So I guess it depends on what sort of part of the process you're unclear on, but I waited, like I submitted to agents and editors for like 4 or 5 years and got increasingly more positive feedback to the point where I was at the revise and resubmit level, basically. And then I decided, I could do this myself. And I like having full control. I think the biggest thing, if you're thinking about self-publishing, is being honest with yourself, whether or not you're a good candidate for it, because there's a lot of things, you have to do everything. Even if you don't create your own covers, you have to hire the person who does and figure out what you want and approve it. And
Right.
You have to figure out your pricing, and you have to figure out your marketing, and like everything, you have to do all of it.
Right.
So it becomes running a business, and that takes time away from writing. So my friends who are traditionally published, they do also have to do some marketing and stuff, but for the most part, they're focused on writing the book, revising the book, turning it in, that kind of stuff. And but they have no control over anything. So they have minimal control over their covers. They might get a choice of 2 or something, and they can't control their pricing or their publicity or the sales.
Yeah.
So some of it is just thinking about what kind of person you are. I'm a total control freak kind of person.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And also I had a friend who was looking for a publisher. They liked it. They wanted him to rewrite a first chapter to make it a little more catchy, more grab. He's like, no, I don't want to do it. But then he said, oh, well, if the publisher actually wanted it, then it must be good enough. You know what I mean? So then he self-published it, but he's a guy that doesn't like, was afraid of his own shadow. So he's not someone's going to market something, right? And so he sold like 10 books. He wouldn't even tell his family that it was out, right? So he wouldn't. And so then he stopped writing. And he stopped writing for like 5-6 years and got all depressed and stuff. And it's just like, and we tried to help him, right? We really did. And so the thing is, right, know yourself. I really appreciate you saying that. If you're going to get into that game, and like you said, that you're not going to do your own marketing and publishing, even if a publisher publishes, right? You have to usually create your own website anyhow, and do some talks and
have a newsletter.
Right? So it's almost the same thing, but not. Obviously, having an awesome distributor can be fantastic.
Sure. Also money. I mean, if you're self-publishing, you front all the costs. So
right. And then real quick, I want to talk about Balboa Press real quick, because they're that in-between space where you pay them to publish. And I'm going to do a whole rant and rave about that. You just got to be careful about those people. Because whereas this is, Gwen's cover, right? And this is mine, where then, I paid an artist like $300-400 and a graphic person to put it all together, and we got a great spider on the back. I have a friend who actually paid like $8,000 for Balboa Press, and I'd hold up her book, but I don't have it, but also I don't want to share her name. It is a solid blue cover. It's a spiritual book. All it's got is black letters, black name, no subtitle, blue cover. Somehow they convinced her that was okay. And then I'm thinking, well, maybe that's just, one off and it's a bad experience. And I had a friend say, hey, I'm going to work with Balboa Press, but I'm thinking about upgrading this package. Would you take a look at it? I'm like, sure. So I go on their website, I look at the $8,000 package, I look at the $12,000 package. There it is. They have a video of another book, solid red cover. It's a travel book about going to France with their daughter and how they emotionally bonded. And it's a solid red cover, like Travel More. And I'm like, have you ever seen a travel book without like the destination of a fantastic picture, right?
Yeah.
And I was like so appalled that these
No.
people are willing to take $8,000 or $12,000 of someone's money and convince them that that cover is good enough.
If you're
Yeah.
like, if you're stopped by the whole, like, get my book onto the retailer's process,
Yeah.
try something like draft to digital, because that's one stop. Like, you put it there and they send it all to everybody. You just check the boxes of who you want it to go to.
Nice.
And then if you want your book to be in print, KDP, which is Kindle, Amazon, they can do a print book for you, or Ingram can do a print book for you.
Mhm.
You're better off paying somebody to, if you can't do it yourself, to create the EPUB and the PDF you need, to create the cover for you. And if you got to go cheap, there's like Fiverr, stuff like
Right.
that.
That's where I found my artist, right?
You will probably get a better result, and you won't be in the hole with all this money because you're not going to go sell probably 50,000 books.
Right.
Most people
Right.
don't.
And with Balboa Press, like my book is pretty thick, right? And it's $16 on Amazon because of the thickness of it.
Yeah.
But her book is half the size of mine, and the lowest they're going to let her sell her book for is $20.
Yeah.
Because they want a bigger markup. So that's where the lack of control then start coming in. So
it's like the worst of both worlds,
exactly,
right? You had to
right.
pay. They try to make you feel like it's exclusive because we're going to accept your book,
right.
And then they don't give you any of the good stuff.
Anytime Hay House might discover it, and then they have a certain amount of control over it. Like the pricing can never be changed, and anything like that.
I mean, pricing is a beautiful part of having control, because you can do BookBub ads, and you can do, all kinds of little marketing things to get some momentum going. So yeah, please don't use, like, we used to call them vanity press, but there's a couple of them out there.
That's what I've got for today. There's a group that I lead. It's called Let's Create Tuesday. You probably don't even know this, Gwen, but it's a Tuesday night group that I started, online writing and creativity group, started during the pandemic because so many people were eating and drinking too much. I'm like, people, we need to be a little more creative, right? So I started this online creativity group. Every Tuesday night meets, we talk about creativity and inspiration, then we write or paint or draw or play guitar for 45 minutes. And then we come back, we have a process of a way of connecting, right? And what's been really beautiful about it is I've found that people who are writers and do this, even if they only write Tuesday night, all of a sudden after about 4 weeks, 6 weeks, then all of a sudden they find themselves writing in the middle of the week too, right? Like one time, right? And then it's a way that many people have started building a writing habit. So I just put it in the link. If anyone's interested, you can check that out. And there's then there's also a video that I recently made is can I create on demand? Because that's actually one of the biggest questions people have about Let's Create Tuesday. Can I just show up and write? Can I just do it? Can I just and it's a video that can explore that, ideally with a little humor, if anyone is interested in all of that. Thank you, Gwen. That was fantastic.
Thanks for showing up. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, excellent. Then I'll let you know when Lindsay and Todd succeed in their adventure in blind trust. I look forward to it. All right, everyone. If you want to unmute, if you want to say your goodbyes, that's fantastic. Thanks for everyone for showing up, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Gwen.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
John.
Gwen.
Thanks, John. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, John.
This was
Thanks,
great.
Gwen.
So much.
Okay, bye.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Gwen. Very
Thanks.
much appreciated.